This episode of The Unstarving Musician is sponsored by Liner Notes. Learn from the hundreds of musicians and industry pros I've spoken with for The Unstarving Musician on topics such as marketing, songwriting, touring, sync licensing, and much more. Sign up for Liner Notes. Liner Notes is an email newsletter from yours truly in which I share some of the best knowledge gems garnered from the many conversations featured on The Unstarving Musician. You'll also be privy to the latest podcast episodes and Liner Notes subscriber exclusives. Sign up at unstarvingmusician.com. It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. This is The Unstarving Musician. I'm Rabanzo. This is my podcast. It features conversations with independent music artists and industry professionals with occasional special topic episodes featuring yours truly. A glimpse into the minds of my varied guests, all intended to help independent music artists better understand the marketing, business, and creative processes that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Welcome to another episode, and Happy New Year. Are you optimistic or terrified? I'm mostly optimistic, but there's reason for being terrified, if that's how you're feeling. I forgot. It's a pleasure to be in your earbuds today. I really appreciate it. What are you wearing? Yeah, the world. Every day's a gift, right? So, quick preamble here. I have 2 shows in January and new videos performing with Chicago blues man Johnny Bergen. There will be links in the show notes for both of those, or you can just go to rabanzo.com for the shows. Soon for those videos too, or my YouTube channel at Rabanzo on YouTube for those videos. Jennfer Roig Francoli is my guest for this episode. She is a violinist, healer, coach for musicians, and the creator of The Art of Freedom, method for conscious living, and Masterful Artistry. That's kind of hard to get out. She's done multiple solo appearances at Carnegie Hall with orchestras such as the Pittsburgh and Berlin Symphony Orchestras. She's a former associate concertmaster and soloist for the Grammy-Award winning baroque ensemble Apollo's Fire. Jennfer's also a former faculty at the Cincinnati College-Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati and Xavier University, or Xavier, not sure how they say it. She's a prize-winning medical researcher on Alexander technique for surgeons, published in the Journal of Urology, and the founder of the Alexander Technique Guild of Ohio. She says, Jennfer, I help musicians feel better and play better. Feel better and play better. Helps musicians of all kinds overcome physical and emotional obstacles to joyful, successful musical life. That sounds good, right? Students in her private and group coaching programs learn how to free themselves from pain, tension, performance anxiety, and more, so they can enjoy what they love with ease. What they love, making music, right? The short of her story is that she played professionally at a very high level and at an early age. She gave up playing violin to pursue spiritual practices and raise a family, but aspects of physical pain and creative void crept into her life, and she eventually discovered Alexander technique, became an instructor and practitioner, and rediscovered her love of violin. This is the abridged version of her life. But Jennfer has a new book out. It's called Make Great Music with Ease, The Secret to Smarter Practice, Confident Performing, and Living a Happier Life. We talk about her book and self-publishing, attributing challenge to her personal turnaround, teaching Alexander technique, the musician taboo of admitting pain, getting stuck, fear, courage, performance anxiety, thinking less, overdoing, and, of course, more. She is a really sweet person, or she struck me as so. I really enjoyed talking with her. It's an informative episode about what she's doing and how her life has been transformed, and I hope you enjoy it. Here is me talking with Jennfer Roig Francoli. You have a new book out. Make Great Music with Ease. Wait, before I finish that title, has it dropped yet? Is it published yet officially?
Yes, actually, the paperback version is available right now, and we're doing our public launch on January 7th. That's
Okay.
when I'm going to go all out on social media and everything.
Okay.
That's
Yes,
for the ebook and the hardcover on January 7th.
Okay, yeah, I knew there was something happening later, and I'm like, wait, did it publish? I should have figured that out before we got on the call, huh?
Now, are we recording now or?
We have been. So, okay, so let me squeeze the whole title in.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Are you going to edit this, by the way?
No, man, so be careful. Just kidding. I'll edit some. Okay, so it's called Make Great Music with Ease, The Secret to Smarter Practice, Confident Performance, and Living a Happier Life. I love that. What a tell my listeners about the inspiration and why do the book now?
Oh, let me answer that second question first. Why do it now? I have been trying to write this book that was in me for more than a decade. And this was my third attempt. And I thought, third time's the charm. I have to make it work this time. So the timing was right. The ideas had finally gelled enough to flow to the page. And again, the ideas have been in me. The book is about my personal journey as a musician, as an artist, and also as an Alexander technique teacher, mind body expert. And so I think the book had to happen now because the first couple times I tried, I don't think I had quite the ideas hadn't really gelled and matured enough to come out in the format that I was able to bring them out in now. So I think that's the timing. The timing just came of itself. I was ready. It was ready to come through, and here we are. And the inspiration for the book, it goes along with that, really. It's about, oh, it's so much. The book is about life. It's about everything. It's about me growing up as a musician, the struggles I had, how I overcame them by discovering the Alexander technique and learning how to integrate my mind and body also with my spiritual life. That's a big part of it. And then having a lot of students. I work with musicians of all kinds from all walks of life, beginners, amateurs, elite professionals, any genre. And just coming to see how much we are all suffering, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. The students who come to me all have unique challenges, but in the end, we're all really the same. And so being able to help hundreds of musicians over the years, I wanted to be able to help more people. And I teach online exclusively, so I have a pretty wide reach around the world. But I really felt that writing a book was going to be able to help more of those people, especially the people who maybe couldn't afford my coaching programs online. They can hopefully, buy the book and get a lot of help, support, and inspiration just from the book. So,
Sold.
yeah, that's the inspiration.
Very nice. Well, there's a lot to ask you about there, but for those who have been trying to get ideas to paper, and I can include myself in that. So I published a small, humble little book a few years ago, and I've learned so much from talking to other musicians, various musical walks of life, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And the book, I feel that the book needs an update of all kinds. But
I'll have to look for that.
Pardon me?
I'll have to look for that. Your book.
Well, for those who are struggling to either do what I haven't done yet, or maybe their first book, I know there was timing you said, but do you have a pro tip you can drop that just made it all coalesce?
Yes, get help. I think that's the biggest tip. I decided to self-publish, and that was, I did research on the different ways to get the book out there. So, of course, you can go the traditional route to find a publisher. That's very difficult these days. Most people need to get an agent. You need to, pitch publishers, and sometimes that in itself is like writing a book. And then you don't really have control over your creative material once a publisher has it, and the royalties are minimal. So, and often they don't even promote the book for you much. So I felt that it wasn't the way I wanted to go. I wanted to have control over my intellectual property. And these days, self-publishing is really feasible. And yet, I'm not so sure I would have been able to do it without getting professional help from people, from um, coaches out there who've actually, I mean, they know the process, they know how to do it, and it's pretty complex. The process is complex. It's as if I actually recorded a CD of my own during the pandemic, and there's absolutely no way that I could have recorded that CD without professional help in that area too. I didn't know how to set up a studio with acoustic tiles. I didn't know where to put them. I had no idea how to use Logic and the software, the systems, which microphones to buy. So I guess having professional help from the people who've been there, they've done it, and they know what's involved, I think saves a huge amount of time, energy, and angst, and it's absolutely worth investing in programs or coaches to help you do that.
Yeah, good. I'm happy to hear that. Okay, so among the themes of your book, or I guess maybe the various types of struggles, physical, emotional, or mental, maybe some others that I missed there, that musicians can feel afflicted by. Do you attribute one of those categories as being your biggest challenge when you made your personal turnaround, and I'm referring to the physical, emotional, or mental types of challenges, or was there something else?
Well, I really believe strongly that everything's connected. So, and that's a big theme that runs throughout the whole book, is that we are not divided selves. We are whole beings. And so there is no such thing as just a mental problem or just a physical problem, or just a psychological or emotional or spiritual problem. It's all connected, even if the issue presents itself as being just one aspect. Like, for example, I had neck pain when I reached out to the third Alexander technique teacher that I tried. The first two, I didn't really like it. I kind of wrote the whole thing off. But then, like 12 years later, a friend of mine said, "You really have to try the Alexander technique again." And my neck was hurting, and the regular doctors and chiropractors were not being able to help at all. So I thought, okay, I'll try it one more time. I went to the Alexander technique teacher that was recommended, and he opened up the door, and I knew it would work. And within a few lessons, my neck pain was completely gone. But the interesting thing was that not only was the neck pain gone, but I had also been kind of miserable before that for a good while. And I didn't go to the Alexander lessons to help me feel happier, or to, be able to deal with certain issues in my personal life better. But what happened is that my neck pain got better, and at the same time, I started feeling happier, and life brightened up. And I kind of fell in love with life again in such a way that I kept going back to those lessons, because I couldn't believe how much better I was feeling in every aspect of my life. And I wanted to understand what was going on and learn more of this amazing thing. So I don't know if that answers your question. So it seemed like it was a physical thing, but really it was a whole person problem that I got help with.
Yeah, I was laughing a little bit on the inside, thinking I knew she was going to say this. It's all connected.
It is.
Why did I? No, it's good stuff. And you appreciated it so much, you became a certified Alexander technique teacher. Yeah.
That's right. Yes. Well, I did that not because I wanted to teach at the time. Now I absolutely love it and live for it. But when I started the teacher training course, which is actually 3 years long, it's 1,600 hours of training over 3 years, the way I trained. And the reason I started doing that was because I really wanted to understand how it was working, how it was helping me, so that I could help myself, so that I could get myself to feel great the way I felt in the lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And the lessons themselves weren't teaching me how to do it for myself in a way that was satisfying enough for me personally. So I did the teacher training in the hopes that I could figure it out. And the truth is that I did learn a lot, and I could do a lot for myself by the end of the training, but I was still unsatisfied because even though I was able to help other people feel great, I still didn't really understand how to do it for myself. And that's a big part of what I write about in part 2 of the book, which is my journey. The way I teach Alexander technique these days is actually pretty different from how I was taught and how most people have experienced the Alexander technique traditionally. The usual way, the traditional way of learning Alexander technique and teaching it is through touch. So a teacher with very gentle hands-on guidance helps you to stop doing certain habits of movement. You're fully clothed, you're standing, sitting, moving. They're kind of movement re-education lessons. And then there's also a section of the lesson where traditionally you lie down, and it's a very therapeutic hands-on process. So I learned how to teach that way and did for some years. But the way I teach now is actually what I've always been interested in most. It's about how the way you think affects what's going on in your body and your emotions and your whole self. So I'm much more interested in helping people to notice their habits of thinking and moving so that they can change their habits and think and move differently in more healthy, constructive, positive ways that gets them, helps them heal from physical problems, helps them get over performance anxiety, for example. And it's all about how you think, because what you think is what you get. The body just reflects how you're thinking in your mind. So the more interested I got in that connection, thought to body and emotions, the less I was using my hands, because I felt it was more empowering for my students to learn how to do it for themselves.
I know you have a focus on musicians, which is great, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever teach these techniques to non-musicians to help them?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Actually, it's funny because I'm from a musical family and I've been around music my entire life. And then when I did the Alexander Technique training course, it was mostly non-musicians. And when
Mhm.
I graduated from that course, I wanted to teach everybody but musicians. It just felt kind of liberating to be out in the world at large and not always around musicians. And so for years, the first few years, I mostly taught um, all kinds of other people, journalists. I remember a firefighter I had, doctors, psychiatrists. I mean, I had all kinds of students that weren't musicians. But then over the years, it just became so obvious that I know musicians inside out. I am one. I grew up in that family. I lived a very intense musical life for decades. And so it just was like a no brainer that I should start teaching musicians more. But I did really resist it for a while till finally I surrendered, and now I only teach musicians and love it, by the way.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to ask you your thoughts on this idea of a taboo of admitting, suffering as a musician or in the industry. And do you think that taboo is still alive and well, so to speak?
Oh, yes, very much so. I remember a student who came to me recently who was performing nightly and had pain for months, but was afraid to tell the people he was working with, the people in his band and his employer, the band's employer. He was afraid to admit it because he was afraid they wouldn't hire him again. And I think it's, from a certain perspective, it makes sense that a person would be, reticent to share that information. Um, but at the same time, it makes everything worse if you're trying to hide a problem that you're having. And you also can't, it's a lot harder to get the help you need. So this student really, ideally would have been able to stop performing completely for a while and just heal. But because he was afraid of the loss of income, he didn't stop and made the problem worse and worse and worse. Whereas if he, had stopped as soon as he started noticing pain and kind of owned up to it and trusted that it was going to work out, and hopefully the people around him would be generous and, concerned and want to help him. If he'd stopped in the beginning, he might not even have had to be away from his instrument for very long. But I think the problem is that because people are afraid to share the problems that they have, they're afraid of being vulnerable, they're afraid of negative consequences. They push through pain and ignore it. And I mean, it's hard to be really happy when you're in physical pain. And so not only are they suffering physically, but also emotionally from having to hide their problem and worrying about their futures, worrying about their career, worrying about not being able to play anymore. So again, it's like the physical and the emotional become completely intertwined, and it's really unfortunate. So I'm thinking about this particular student as an example who was in a band, but it's the same in an orchestra, or as a soloist. That's really tough too, because if people get to know that you have tendonitis and need to take time off, what's going to happen to that schedule that you have booked out for the next couple of years? Right. So I think it's a human fear of sharing what's wrong, but also can really make things worse for the person.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a story that if you have an opportunity to check out, and I want to mention it for people that are listening here, and I hadn't thought of it until just now, but I had an interview some months ago with the original drummer from the pop band Maroon 5, pop rock band, Ryan Dusick, and he has this incredible story of much of what you described. He was going through physical, emotional and mental anguish, which led to his having to part ways with the band after they'd achieved, this huge amount of success. And so he's written a book about that, and he's in the therapy space these days, helping really? People. Yeah. And it's great. An incredible story. And in fact, he sent me a preview copy of his book when we did it. And I had to message him back because he starts with the story of the day that his having to part ways with the band happened. And it was just enthralling to sort of imagine his pain that was, both highly emotional, maybe more than physical, but incredible story.
Wow, can't even imagine. So
yes.
Tough. You put your whole life and all your passion and energy into this one thing, and you have success, and then to have to just, have to leave it like that must be really, really hard.
It's scary. I'm sure athletes and many other types of professionals go through similar types of struggles and challenges.
And yet, one thing that I did say in the book that I think is worth paying attention to for people in general is that the thing about being afraid to speak up about your problems, I think that's actually pretty, as far as I'm aware, I mean, I'm not an athlete, far from it, but it seems to me that in that world, in the world of sports, there is such a thing as sports medicine. And I was going to say backstage, but it's not a stage, on the sidelines, they have physical therapists, they have massage therapists. Like, athletes just automatically get support for their physical body. It's like it comes with the job, it comes with the territory. There's an expectation that anybody who's going to use their bodies for a sport needs that kind of support. And in the music world, that's like blatantly not there. And even though I really do think we are athletes just on a micro level, right? We're using our bodies in, sometimes for many hours a day, day after day, and we're under, performers are under high stress situations too. So performers, we use our bodies, our minds, our whole selves as much as any athlete, and yet we don't get support like that. I mean, some people do occasionally, like enlightened orchestras will have maybe a massage therapist backstage. I mean, I've heard of that maybe once in my life, but for the most part, musicians have to fend for themselves. So,
Sure.
so many musicians will just expect that they need to go pay for massages once a week forever, or for the chiropractor forever, and keep going back. And it's not something that the administrations are supporting, if you know what I mean.
Sure. I'm sure at some levels, I'm not an athlete. I never have been, but I do admire them quite a bit. And I'm sure to some degree, there are these varying levels where, you've got the world stage athlete who has all those things, just like you might with a certain level of musician, maybe like a pop musician, for instance. And then you have the folks that are more like independent, or they're doing the athletic thing at a smaller scale and don't have quite the attention, and sometimes none. I'm thinking of this. There's I was going to use the word cult. It's not the right word. Absolutely not the right word. A culture, I guess, of roller derby. It's like, the women's sport, and they really do everything themselves from what I've learned. And I do wonder, like in that world, do they get any attention for these types of things? Because I mean, they're literally like fundraising. They're like musicians, basically, like an independent musician. They're fundraising, they're going around doing their thing, having a great time, probably getting hurt,
Yeah.
and they may not have the same type of attention.
It's a really good point.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about it.
It is so interesting. For some reason, I've met two different women who do it, and it's really fun to talk to them. And it's probably because I, to a degree, compare myself, the independent musician dilemma to what they do, and also because roller derby was so weirdly fascinating when I was a kid on TV. But anyway.
Well, now you're making me curious. I'm gonna have to
You
go
gotta look
online.
into it. I'm telling you, subculture is the word I should have used. Subculture. There's a subculture of these ladies out there that do this, and I think it's pretty cool. I'm yet to see a game, but it's fun. If you ever meet someone that does it, you can just feel the passion when they talk about it. But if you're anything like me, you struggle to keep your energy level steady, especially in the afternoons. I love coffee, but try not to drink it after around 10:30 in the morning. Sometimes I have the forbidden third cup, but, normally. Making music, creating new podcast episodes, writing subscriber emails, and producing videos requires a lot of focus. Can't you imagine? I'm talking about productivity and creativity here. Well, I found something helpful. It's called Magic Mind. After trying it, I found it to be an ideal fix for my afternoon energy focus needs. It's ideal to me because it's easy to drink and it tastes great. That's right, easy to drink. It's like a little energy shot. It has a short list of high-quality ingredients that will intrigue and likely help you. I think matcha may be the difference maker for me, but there are others, including Bacopa monnieri and cordyceps mushrooms. Those were both hard to pronounce, but it's intriguing, right? I really like the taste of Magic Mind, and I felt really good after taking it, and I'm not even good at taking supplements. I encourage you to check it out, especially if you struggle to stay focused like me. This month of January only, Magic Mind will help you crush your 2024 resolutions and goals, fully focused. Here's the deal. You can get 1 month for free when you're subscribed for 3 months at magicmind.com/Jennfer. JANTUM. That's like January and TUM for the unstarving musician. Again, that's magicmind.com/JANTUM. Use discount code TUM20. It's for an extra 20% off, which gets you 75% off in total. This only lasts until the end of January, so hurry up before it goes away. Again, get 1 month for free when subscribing for 3 months at magicmind.com/JANTUM. Use discount code TUM20, and you can find all this in the show notes if it's too hard to remember. Try it out. You'll like it. All right, so let's take a left turn. What is financial lemonade?
What is financial lemonade?
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about like making lemonade out of lemons?
I don't know. You wrote it on your blog. I was hoping it meant something to you.
Well, I have to be very honest. I write things and then they are over and gone.
I can relate.
So I can make something up for you right now, but I don't really remember what I meant when I wrote that because I don't remember writing it.
Okay, let's try. What comes to mind?
Well, whenever I think of lemonade, I do use the analogy of making lemonade out of lemons very often in my teaching. And mostly it's about having an attitude that can turn anything that happens to you into something positive. And I do feel that's actually at the core of my work because it is always starting with a mental attitude. Actually, Alexander himself, the originator of the Alexander technique, did write in his first book that our work with ourselves must begin with a mental attitude. And I think most of the problems that we may end up having in our lives are really tied up in how we decide to look at a situation. I'm very good at coming up with the sunny side of whatever it is. So, for example, okay, so here's a personal example from my own life. I used to be on the faculty of the University of Cincinnati College-Conservatory of Music, where I was teaching the Alexander technique. And I was an adjunct faculty. As most people are aware, adjunct faculty typically don't get paid much at all, and there's no job security. And my program, the Alexander Technique program at CCM, had been there for decades, and it was going strong until one year there were serious financial problems at the university, and they were calling on every department to cut whatever they could for financial reasons. And unfortunately, my program had started out in the dance division because the first Alexander teacher there was a dancer, so it was housed in the dance division. So even though when I came along, I was a musician, the classes were still in the dance division. And yet most of my students, the people who came to me, ended up being musicians, and the dancers had other classes that they tended to go to. I did have some dancers, but when they were looking at what to cut, well, dance division said, hey, our students aren't really using this much. It's all musicians, so we shouldn't be funding that in our division, so let's cut that. So they cut my program completely. And at that time, that was my main source of income, teaching Alexander technique at the university. So
was this at the Conservatory of Music by chance?
Yes, this was at CCM,
okay,
the College-Conservatory of Music.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that was pretty shocking to me, especially because I found out about it just weeks before my divorce, and I was pretty terrified to get divorced anyway. It took me a long time to decide to do that for financial reasons, because as a music teacher and as an Alexander technique teacher teaching musicians, I was not able to support myself at that time. And then suddenly having the rug pulled out from under me when they cut the Alexander program at the university was really terrifying. And it seemed like a horrible thing at the time. But in retrospect, it turned out to be one of the very best things that could have happened to me. And here's where I think my attitude helped, because I could have, wallowed and gotten really depressed and, gone downhill when all that happened. But I just decided, okay, well, this is the fact. This is how it is. What can I do about it? And so I'm like, I need to support myself. So I'd better figure out how to do that. So I better figure out how to market what I'm doing. And I knew nothing about marketing. So I started educating myself, basically teaching myself from things I found online, and started, looking for different music schools in the area, taught classes at music schools in the area for a while. That was not bringing in much income, and clearly it wasn't going to go anywhere. My family members, many of them were saying, Jennfer, you really should start taking auditions for orchestras. You should start teaching violin lessons. I didn't want to do either of those things. I wanted to teach Alexander technique, but specializing in musicians in one city, trying to find enough musicians who were interested in this obscure thing, it wasn't going to work. So that's when I decided I'm going to see if I can teach this online. And thank goodness I did experiment with that, because I had been using my hands less and less over the years. It worked. And so then I educated myself on, okay, how can I market my teaching studio online? How can I bring in students from outside of Cincinnati? And here's where what I mentioned before about getting help was absolutely crucial, because I could have continued to struggle to educate myself on how to market, but I thought, okay, I need an expert who knows how to do this to teach me. So I invested in hiring business coaches and people who weren't in the music world at all, but who knew about online marketing. So it was a very intense process that went on for the next years. Can't even say how many. I'm still learning. But it was the best thing that could have happened to me, to have my finances actually ripped away from me, because necessity is the mother of invention. And if you have the attitude that I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to figure it out and get help, and just do what it takes. And so here I am years later, and there's no way I could have grown in the way that I did, that I have, if I had remained stuck teaching what I was teaching at the university, which was kind of a dead end as an adjunct teacher. There was no room for growth. There was a cap on how many students I was allowed to have. So I guess I made financial lemonade.
Thank God
How's
that question went somewhere.
You never know.
It was worth exploring for sure. Isn't that funny how in life we can stay in these situations that maybe, for lack of better words, a dead end, and only to find that there's something brighter there. I would imagine that somehow, some way, maybe in a very distinct way, that the work that you do can help pull people out of those types of situations also.
Oh, absolutely. I think what keeps people stuck in dead end situations, or stuck in a rut, so to speak, where they're really not satisfied with how things are, but it's kind of familiar, it's what they've known, and they don't see any other options. I think what keeps people stuck is fear. And it is, like I said, it was absolutely terrifying to be going through a divorce, knowing I couldn't support myself, and my major source of income, which was already small, suddenly disappeared. That was pretty terrifying. And so I didn't have a choice, because it was taken away. So I had to do something about it. But so many people, I feel, are stuck in the roles that they've taken on or that they've been given. And it's just comfortable enough or familiar enough that taking a risk to change everything is a little too scary. And it does take courage. It does take guts. It takes taking a chance, being really willing to take chance on something that may not work out, but having the attitude that no matter what happens, I'll figure it out. That takes takes courage. And the work that I do, the Alexander technique, really does help with that. You're totally right. And the way it helps is that with practice, so I give my students from day one in any program, they have specific things to practice, to work on how their thinking and their body are integrated. And they start to recognize from the very beginning how the way they're thinking may be getting in their own way. And fear really does come from a way of thinking. I don't believe that it's actually natural to us. I think fear is learned. It's something that we've actually practiced without knowing it. And it's often in reaction, in response to our environment. It's not our fault at all if we grow up anxious, but because maybe we had certain situations that we were growing up in that caused a startle, fight, flight, freeze response, and we just were in that all the time. So it's not like it's anybody's fault. And yet the Alexander technique can help you recognize that the way that you're thinking can actually cause the anxiety and can cause corresponding tension in the body. And that tension in the body makes it harder to move, literally. It's like your muscles contract and then it's harder to move your joints. So as a musician, it's harder to play fast technical passages, for example. But you also, when you start to be aware of the fear-based thoughts or the self-doubt, a lot of my students come with imposter syndrome, thinking they're never going to be good enough. And with that type of thinking, it really prevents people from feeling like they can take a risk and still be okay no matter what happens.
Right. It
So
makes a lot of sense if you think about fear in certain situations when they're at some extreme level, that it makes sense that in very subtle ways it can creep into your life in not necessarily a positive way. Although I know that fear can at the same time come in handy for us in certain situations. However, in this
absolutely,
context,
yes.
in this context, what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, the fight, flight, freeze response is not something we want to get rid of. if you see a wild animal coming towards you, you need to, let your instincts kick in and take care of you. But a lot of the times as musicians, again, performance anxiety is a really good example of when you want to go on stage, you want to perform, and it's not really a life or death situation, but the animal part of our brain believes it is, and it's not really a safe situation for an animal to go on stage and be exposed under spotlights, magnified in front of hundreds or thousands of strangers that you never know, maybe they're predators out there. So it's, to the animal person on the inside, it makes sense to be afraid of that situation. But then the human part of us needs to know how to rise above that. And we have this wonderful human capacity to think. So we get to learn how to do what in my mode of Alexander teaching is called primal Alexander. We call it constructive thinking. So when you learn how to do this specific thing called constructive thinking, which is a very specific way to use your mind to your advantage, you, with practice, get to think in a way that allows your nervous system to calm down. And with practice, long before, is like I give my students what we called awareness etudes. They practice them for just a few minutes twice a day in advance of a performance, sometimes months in advance. But then, like the night before, the morning of, if the adrenaline kicks in, they know exactly how to think differently to calm down the nervous system and actually look forward to the experience, to look forward with love and joy instead of fear towards sharing this wonderful passion for music that they have with an audience that is eager to participate and enjoy it with them. It's a matter of kind of flipping a switch in the brain. That's actually really easy to do once you learn how to do it. but it's a skill, and it takes practice to rise above animal instinct and fear and feelings of dread or anxiety, and to be able to actually go towards what you were afraid of with a positive attitude.
Well, you've certainly got me thinking about my own stages of anxiety just as a musician. And yeah, it sounds like really interesting stuff, interesting work, and
Well,
potentially very, very helpful.
Sorry. Yeah, performance anxiety is really, really common. There are, of course, people who don't have it, but there are lots and lots of famous musicians who are excellent, who have extreme stage fright and somehow do it anyway.
Yes, I've read about them. I've met them. And what's funny for me is I don't, at least in my head, I don't experience it at the moment of performing. Not usually, but it's all the things leading up to that. The preparation, and I typically, always play in ensemble situations, and I'm more times than not, I'm involved in sort of organizing part, if not most of all of that activity. And different situations can cause some angst for sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about musicians, how even though most people have it, different situations trigger it differently with people. Like for me, for example, I was a soloist growing up, and I never had any performance anxiety performing as a soloist. And the first time I remember really experiencing performance anxiety, and it became a thing, like it happened repeatedly, was when I got a job playing in the back of the second violin section in the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. So in that situation, I was in an ensemble. I was in the back. Nobody could hear me or see me pretty much. And yet I started shaking. I was so nervous to actually, for me, I was worried about sticking out because I was supposed to fit in and play softly, and nobody was supposed to hear me as separate from anyone else. And that produced a lot of anxiety in me. It's really funny how people respond differently to different situations. Some people get more nervous playing for people they know, and other people get much more nervous playing for strangers. You never know.
Yeah, it comes in all shapes and sizes. Well, okay, so there's so much about you that we haven't talked about and we won't get to, but I'm going to mention a lot of this in the intro for your episode and in the post for it. So I'll catch everyone up on your education, your work, your journey into the world of spirituality and philosophy. But I wanted to wrap us up with some truly left field questions. And I was thinking, as I was writing them down, or maybe as we started talking, because I think for a lot of people, especially when they hear and read about your credentials and here you are helping others, people like you can come across as just pretty superhuman at moments. And I know you're just like the rest of us. But anyway, this will be, perhaps this will help humanize you for people that might think that way. But and I should preface with, if something comes to mind, great. The questions are just intended for you to take from the question what you will and run with it if you can. And if you can't, no biggie. We have a couple of them. So are you ready?
Sure. Yeah. And now I'm really curious.
Okay, so what are you thinking about these days?
What am I thinking about these days? Oh my gosh. I'm actually trying to think less. Truly, I am becoming more and more and more aware of how most of my thoughts are not helpful to get me where I want to go. And so I'm becoming more and more aware of choosing wisely how to use my mind. I'm very interested in having better control of what I do with my thinking, because I'm more and more aware of how responsible I am for the effects of my thoughts, not just on my body, but on my actions. And, everything that we do has consequences. And I think as I go along, I'm just seeing more and more clearly that if I want to get somewhere, do something with my life, maybe something specific, I need to pay better attention to what I'm doing with my thinking. So that's what's interesting me these days. And so I laughed, but it's true. I want to think. Maybe it's not so much that I want to think less in general, because we're just thinking beings. Like you're gonna think, I'm gonna think, but I want to be much more conscious about what I'm filling my head with and use my time well. I'm just so conscious. I mean, there's such awful things happening in the world and in the news every day, and there are wars around the world, and there are people dying, starving. I mean, just awful things in the world. And I am more and more aware that we don't know when the end of our own life is going to happen. And I would like to use the time that I have left. Hopefully, it's a good long time. I'm 53 now, so it could be a long time. But who knows? Could die tomorrow or later today. Who knows? I would like to use the time that I have well, and that means I need to really take responsibility for what I'm doing with my thinking, and therefore my body, and directing it all towards something that I think is worth doing for myself and other people.
It's so meta. I love it. Thinking about your thinking. That's great. Okay. What is slowing you down the most?
My thinking. What is slowing me down the most is, yeah, I think what slows me down the most is feeling overwhelmed at times, because, well, and not wanting to get burned out, but sometimes feeling on the edge of burned out. I I do a lot, and I'm also very aware of wanting to be at ease while I'm doing what I'm doing. And yet, I'm like everybody else. I get tired and I overdo and I overthink, and especially writing this book was such a marathon. It took me That was, I think, the hardest project I've ever taken on. I had no idea what I was getting into. It's probably a good thing I didn't know, or I wouldn't have done it. But, working on that consistently, most days for hours, over months, and I think a total of like a year and a half, and just sticking to it, and at the same time teaching and doing the marketing for my studio, for my coaching practice. I do a lot of things, and it's easy for me to start to get tired and be on the edge of overwhelm. But it's like what I teach teaches people not to do that, and so I need to do that for myself. But it's the thinking that causes the belief that what I'm doing is hard, like the belief that it's hard, or the thinking I'm tired. Like if I think I'm tired, I'm going to feel more tired, and it feeds itself. So I need to really watch my thinking, because that does slow me down and it does get in the way. So again, I just need to be a really good observer of my own habits and practice what I preach, because it does work.
I'll have to make a note. That's a great question for coaches. I like that. I like that. Okay, and then last of all, what are you proud of?
That's a really interesting question. I'm proud of a lot of things. I think I'm proud of sticking with, like, making a decision that I want to do something and sticking with it over time. Like this book, for example. The first two times I tried it, I gave up. And the third time, like, okay, this time I'm going to stick with it and I'm going to make it happen. And I did. And also taking on challenges, like, that's actually on the first page of my book in the introduction. There were a number of things that I remember where, for example, in an Alexander lesson, I remember so well having my teacher work with me, and the thought flashed through my mind, oh my gosh, what a beautiful profession. I could never do that. And here I am doing it. Or, I had this research study, fall in my lap, and my first reaction was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not the right person for this. I can't do that. And yet I decided to say yes and did it. So I think throughout my life, there have been a lot of times when I believed I couldn't do something, like as my knee-jerk reaction, like, oh no, I can't do that. And then to let myself think about it and not assume that I'm right, that I can't do it, and just to be open to, I really do believe in all possibility. I think it's essential to believe in all possibility. So when I really embody that for myself, to stay open to the possibility that, well, maybe I can do that, even if it feels impossible, to be open to the possibility and then explore it and experiment. It's not like I can do everything. I mean, there are plenty of things I can't do, but I am proud of the fact that there are a lot of things that seemed impossible that I decided to find out if I could do them. And turns out that I could. And then I look back and it's like this book. I hold it in my hands. I'm like, I can't believe I did that. And at the same time, it's like, it's over, it's out there, it's done. I'm not doing it anymore. It's almost like somebody else did it. It's kind of a strange feeling to have that kind of detachment from, well, it's like music. You play your music and it's over. I mean, we can record music, but it's done and gone. It's not like a book or a painting where you can look at it and it still exists. I guess that's why I look at this book and I'm kind of in awe. It didn't just disappear. It's there.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. That's really great. Okay, artoffreedom.me appears to be the best place to go find all your socials and a lot of great content. Your story is in depth there, I guess, is a good way to put it. There's a lot of great stuff there about your career and your journeys, and things like Financial Lemonade too, which you.
I'll have to look that up afterwards. See what on earth I was talking about.
Right, and then Make Great Music with Ease is out on paperback and the ebook edition. Did you say there's going to be an audiobook as well?
I am planning on recording the audiobook, but I need to make the time to do that. I'm planning on doing it towards the end of the winter, early spring. So that will be available and people can actually sign up to get on the wait list for that if they want through my book.
Great. And those are coming in January along with the Media Blitz.
That's right. January 7th is my major public launch. I'm so excited.
That is great. Well, thank you again for spending time with me and sharing this little piece of your story. It was great fun.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. And I love your questions, especially the ones that make me think. Thank you.
You're most welcome. I won't take credit for them, but I other than choosing that looks like a great question to ask. But
thanks so much.
And thanks for playing along. If you do not yet have a website for your music, check out Bandzoogle. It was created to help musicians and bands build their website and manage direct-to-fan marketing and sales. Bandzoogle has amazing design options, a commission-free store to sell music, merch, tickets, and more, plus tools that can capture detailed fan data for you. Try it at bandzoogle.com. Use the promo code ROBONZO, that's ROBONZO, to get 15% off your first year. This episode was powered by Podcast Startup. If you feel you need a little help with that podcast you're contemplating, Podcast Startup may be just the thing for you. Podcast Startup is a program designed for new podcasters. Did you know that most podcasts don't make it past their first few episodes? That's right. They start, they stall, and then they die. Sustaining a podcast ain't easy. It's commitment. A lack of planning and misaligned expectations are a recipe for fast burnout and fade out for podcasters. This is exactly the kind of thing that Podcast Startup was designed to help you with. If you're intrigued, if you want to start a podcast the right way, go to unstarvingmusician.com/podcast startup to learn more and to receive free free podcast startup tips from yours truly. Thank you for listening. You can leave us feedback, questions, comments, complaints at unstarvingmusician.com/feedback. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you love this podcast, please visit unstarvingmusician.com/crowd-sponsor to learn about the many ways of showing your love and support. Your support does indeed equal love. The series music you heard in this episode is New Gods Part 2 by yours truly. Find links for all the places to hear the full version with vocals by yours truly at robonzo.com. Find links for all the people and things talked about in this episode at unstarvingmusician.com. Peace, love, and a whole lot of gratitude.